on the right side of our stage is Republican Ken Timmerman, and from the left, Democratic Congressman Chris Van Hollen. If you would please give him a round. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for joining us at the podiums. As we promised, we're looking for a robust debate tonight. Before we proceed, I'd like to tell our audience a little bit about the format. It's rather unique, as is my mic. We'll be giving each candidate 2 minutes at the beginning and end of the debate for opening and closing statements. We'll have 6 rounds. I'll kick off the first round with one of my own questions, or a question formulated by us at the News Post. Then we'll have 4 rounds in which the candidates will get to question each other. You might notice there's some distance between them. Then I'll end with a question, and we'll be allowing candidates time to respond to each other throughout. Now, the order was determined by a coin toss. First coin toss was won by Mr. Timmerman. So Mr. Timmerman has chosen to have the last word in our closing statements tonight. So he will go first with our opening statements this evening. Now we have the timer down the front. If you keep an eye on those 2 lights there, they will give you, can you see them clearly? They will give you an idea of how much time we have. The yellow light signals 30 seconds left to go. The red light signals time to stop. We'll now take our opening statements for the evening. And as I mentioned, Mr. Timmerman, you won the coin toss, so you decided that Mr. Van Hollen would get to lead us off for this evening.
Oh, very good. Well, thank you very much. Let me thank the Frederick News Post and the other sponsors for hosting us this evening. I'm Chris Van Hollen. I live in Kensington, Maryland. I'm married to my wife, Catherine. We have 3 children. One has graduated from college, one is in college, and one is still in high school. It's been a great privilege to represent the 8th District in the United States Congress, and it's been a great honor to meet a lot of new people in Frederick County and other parts of the new district. Great to be back here at Frederick Community College. I was here just a short time ago meeting with a lot of the students and the teachers, faculty, talking about various issues. My view is that the job of a member of Congress or representatives is to listen carefully to their constituents, to work hard to represent their interests and their priorities, and to exercise good judgment on national issues. And I've worked hard to do that as the current representative of the 8th District, and will continue, if given the opportunity, to try and do that in the new districts. Specifically on local issues, for example, we just went through the BRAC process, and National Military Medical Center, Walter Reed, consolidated their operations in Bethesda. That had a huge potential local impact on traffic issues. We were able to work with the federal government to get about $90 million to relieve traffic congestion, so that soldiers, the family members of soldiers, wounded warriors, could get to that campus, that they could get medical attention, as well as making sure that traffic in the area could go back and forth. So that's one example of trying to work to make sure a federal action does not have a negative local impact. On the larger issues, my view is that we need to work toward principled compromise to get issues through. We all have strong opinions on issues, but if we're going to make progress as a country, there has to be a willingness to listen and to make compromises in order to move the common good forward. And if given the opportunity again, that will be my approach going forward. So again, thank you for inviting us here today.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Timmerman, you have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Ken Timmerman. It's a privilege and an honor to be here. I thank you, Cliff, for moderating this tonight, and I thank all of you who've taken the opportunity to come out and meet the candidates in person. We've had a number of forums where all of the candidates have not been present. I am happy to be here for you, and I look forward to being here for you once I am elected to the United States Congress with your support, and God willing. I want to tell you a little bit about myself, because many of you do not know who I am. I'm an investigative reporter by trade. I am a war correspondent. I'm also a religious freedom activist. I've worked a lot over the past 4 years, especially in northern Iraq, especially in Lebanon, in Jordan, with Christian refugees who have been driven from their homes in Iraq by jihadi Muslims. This is something that I feel very important about, and my most recent book, in fact, is dedicated to this subject. It's called St. Peter's Bones, and I told this as a novel because I wanted people to feel in their gut what it feels like to be a persecuted Christian in a Muslim land. I was taken hostage in Lebanon during one of my early reporting tours in 1982 during the Lebanon War. Again, I went back to that country many, many times. I was there in April of 1983 when jihadi Muslims under the orders of the Islamic Republic of Iran, attacked and blew up our embassy in Beirut. I've been back many times since then, and I've been to other countries that you read about on the front pages of the newspaper. But I've also done other things, and here in Maryland, I've been the president of the Maryland Taxpayers Association, and when I was at MTA, we tried to get a return the surplus amendment passed, so believe it or not, when the government in Annapolis actually had extra money, it would go back to the taxpayers instead of letting the spendthrift politicians spend it. We've got a spending problem in Washington. I want to tackle that. I want to make sure we get our spending under control so we can create jobs again. We know how to do it. I've got a 10-point jobs plan at my website, timmermanforcongress.com, and I hope we'll have opportunity tonight to be able to talk about some of those issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Timmerman. Now we'll go on to our question and answer round to get you both warmed up. I'll ask you a question, and then we'll lead off into the candidates questioning each other. The question goes to Mr. Van Hollen first. With the approval rating of Congress hovering around the 14% mark, at least when I checked it earlier today, and an ever-deepening ideological division splitting government, do you see a way to reach across the aisle on debt reduction, especially with the looming fiscal cliff of sequestration?
I do, and I think that the answer lies in large part in the frameworks, the budget frameworks that have been put forward by bipartisan groups like Simpson-Bowles and Ridlin Domenici. These are Republicans and Democrats who have come together to fashion a mix of cuts but also revenue in order to reduce our deficit. And I think anybody who's taken a serious look at the deficit challenge recognizes that you need to attack it from both ends of the budget equation. You need to deal with the spending, but you also have to deal with the revenue, which is why I support the idea of asking very high income individuals to go back to paying the same rates they were paying when Bill Clinton was president of the United States, a period of time when we created 20 million jobs, and the last time that we balanced the budget. We also need to continue to make cuts. We made $1 trillion of cuts last year, which I support as part of the Budget Control Act. There are other areas where we should be making cuts. But my view is that unless there's a willingness to come together in that kind of bipartisan fashion, we're not going to be able to tackle our deficit issue. We have a framework that's been put forward, and that's one I think we should follow. Now, I don't accept every single recommendation that's within Simpson-Bowles, but I think there's a responsibility where people have a difference with one of their recommendations to come up with an alternative proposal that reduces the deficit by a similar amount. I should also point out, just in closing on this question, it's really important we also focus on accelerating this recovery. We need to do that in order to reduce our long-term deficit. That means having an important jobs effort, and you can do that in conjunction with a plan to reduce the deficit in a steady and credible way. So those two prongs are the key formula for moving the country forward.
Thank you very much. And as I mentioned, there will be some interplay between the candidates this evening, so we are giving Mr. Timmerman a 1-minute rebuttal.
We have a spending problem in Washington. We do not have a revenue problem. And Mr. Van Hollen was on the super committee, and as a result of that, we wound up with $1 trillion of cuts that are heavily weighted towards our defense. Secretary of Defense Panetta, who is President Obama's defense secretary, told Congress that those cuts will hollow out the force, will hollow out our military forces. Chris, you pointed to Bill Clinton's era in Congress. Of course, at that time, we had from the 8th District a Republican in office, Connie Morella, and she did, in fact, work across the aisles, and I look forward to working across the aisles with Democrats who are willing to set aside this notion of millionaires and billionaires who must pay. We cannot play class warfare in this country It is not the American way. We are not a country of haves and have-nots. We are a country of haves and soon-to-haves. And if we're going to pass on the American dream to our children and our grandchildren, that's the vision that we have to be defending, not class warfare.
Thank you very much. Mr. Van Hollen, you have 30 seconds also to respond.
This is not a question of class warfare. This is a question of shared responsibility. The reality is that if you go back to the Clinton era, the last time we balanced the budget, there were higher tax rates in place, including for higher income individuals. Ever since then, we've been running large deficits. So that's why these bipartisan groups, and you say you want bipartisanship, but you reject the idea of taking those groups' proposals as a framework, those groups provide a model for the way forward. If we truly want a bipartisan approach, we've got a framework before us. It has been rejected by people who signed a pledge to Grover Norquist not to raise a single penny of additional revenue, even for very wealthy individuals, for the purpose of reducing the deficit. And unless we're willing to take a bipartisan approach, it's going to be really difficult to get there.
Thank you very much. On round 6, I'll be asking Mr. Timmerman questions that will wrap out our round. But right now, what I'm going to do is step back from the role of questioner. You'll probably be glad to hear that, and allow the candidates to question each other. We'll be allowing 30 seconds for each question. We'll be allowing a 2-minute response. There'll be a 1-minute rebuttal, and then there'll be a further 30-second rebuttal at the end. Clear as mud, I'm sure. But as we go on, it'll become clear. Thank you. And the first question goes to Mr. Timmerman. Mr. Timmerman, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. I'm an investigative reporter by my career, and a lot of that time I've spent investigating career politicians like you, Chris. You've had, in your entire adult life, from what I understand, you have been a politician, either in the state legislature or in the federal legislature. You worked on the Hill for a brief period, and also I believe you had a stint in a law firm where you worked lobbying for a bit. What real-world experience do you have that qualifies you to run for Congress?
Actually, Mr. Timmerman, I worked at a law firm for over 10 years, started as a junior associate, worked myself up to be a partner in the law firm, worked on a lot of complex litigation, worked on a lot of important cases in our region, and in that capacity understood very clearly what it takes to run a business. A law firm is a business, it's a partnership. And at the end of the day, you've got to do the work to make sure that you make ends meet, in addition to making sure you provide great quality legal services to your clients. And I did not lobby, you're entirely mistaken. I was a litigator, represented companies in the area like Clark Construction in their litigation, others in trademark infringement cases, as well as a number of other trademark and patent cases. So the premise of your question is wrong on 2 counts, and in addition to that, obviously, I've got, as someone who's represented this area, Mr. Timmerman, I actually come into contact with people every day who have important stories to tell that help inform the decisions I make, and we provide lots of constituent services to people who are hurting in many different ways. I think that if you look at our record of constituent service, you'll recognize that on a bipartisan basis, people have recognized the work we do for their families.
Thank you, Mr. Timmerman.
Yeah, I promise I won't tell any lawyer jokes. You know, Chris, I think it's great having worked in a law firm all of your life, but I said real-world experience, not experience just in a law firm. I have worked on the ground where Christians have been persecuted. I have worked on the ground with people who have lost their lives to jihadi terrorists. I have also worked with families of 9/11 victims to win them justice in U.S. courts, not as a lawyer, but as an investigator. I've gone around the world with people who have been representing those families to find witnesses who work for Iranian intelligence organizations, at some case to a certain risk to my life and the individuals who went with me. So I have real-world experience. I've also run a business for many, many years, publishing newsletters, and I have signed the front of a paycheck as well as signing the back of one.
Thank you, and 30 seconds, Mr. Van.
Well, I just find it interesting in terms of your international experiences. You know, I'm the son of a Foreign Service officer, someone like Ambassador Stevens, who was just killed in service to our country. Lived in many different parts of the world. I was actually born in Pakistan, and Mr. Timmerman actually has a piece of literature he puts out where born in Pakistan is the only true thing on it, but somehow he thinks, and this isn't, I think it's, people should understand, this goes to sort of his method, somehow born in Pakistan to diplomats should disqualify somebody for being in office. So I'm glad you've had that international experience, Mr. Timmerman. I think that kind of experience is a positive, and I actually salute the many hardworking men and women who are in our foreign service and putting their lives at risk for their country.
Thank you very much. Ms. Fallon, it is now your turn to ask Mr. Timmerman a question.
Sure.
30 seconds.
Yeah. Mac Mathias was one of Frederick County's very distinguished sons. He was a moderate Republican senator. I had the privilege of doing his national security and defense work during his later years in the United States Senate. He was somebody who I thought was a model for principled compromise in the United States Senate. I wonder, Mr. Timmerman, whether you think he would be a role model as well.
Well, I appreciate that you mentioned a Republican. That is certainly a very good notion. I have worked with Democrats on the Hill as somebody defending human rights and defending religious freedom around the world. I've worked with people like Brad Sherman, one of your colleagues, who's now in a very difficult re-election campaign against another Democrat in California. I worked with Joe Lieberman on Iranian human rights issues. And these are issues where, Chris, I don't think you have been quite as present as you would like people to believe. You mentioned a publication that we put out, and you say that there's not a single fact on there that is true. In fact, there's not a single fact that you have managed to dispute. You simply, when you do not like the facts that are on the piece of paper, you change the subject or you want to talk about a different set of facts. The publications that we put out, Mr. Van Hollen, have all been about your record. If you're not happy with your record, that's your problem, but it is your record.
1 minute.
All right, Mr. Timmerman, talk about changing the subject. You obviously didn't want to answer the question. I didn't ask you about who you'd work with. I've worked with lots of Republicans on lots of issues. I asked you whether you thought Mac Mathias was a good example of a principled, statesman-like approach to bipartisan issues. It's a simple question, and I think the audience deserves an answer.
Yes, and I think there are lots of Democrats that I would be very happy to work with on the Hill, and I will work with Democrats on the Hill. I think Mac Mathias has worked with Democrats on the Hill, and I look forward to following in that kind of tradition of reaching across the aisle. But there are certain things that we do not compromise on. There are certain principles we cannot compromise on. I will not raise taxes in a recession. That is what you are calling for. That will take us into a new recession. I will not put that compromise. I will not compromise on that principle. I will not compromise on the size of government. Government is not too small. Government is too big. We have to bring government back down to its constitutional boundaries. So there are things that I will not compromise on. Those are basic principles.
Very good, thank you. If I could remind the audience that the debate's up here. So if you could just sit on your hands until we get to the end. Thank you. Mr. Timmerman, this is your 30-second question for Mr. Van Hollen.
Earlier this year, the Deputy Ambassador of the State of Israel addressed a group called J Street, which is a left-leaning, anti-Zionist organization funded by George Soros. And he said to them, I beg of you, we can have differences on all kinds of different policies, but I beg of you, please do not put pressure on the democratically elected government of the State of Israel. A couple of weeks later, Mr. Van Hollen, you signed a letter that was sponsored by J Street that did exactly that and put pressure on the democratically elected government of Israel to make unilateral concessions to a Palestinian partner they do not have. Why did you sign that letter?
Well, first of all, Mr. Chairman, once again, you're totally mischaracterizing the letter. There are a number of letters that come before the Congress, some of them by another organization that strongly supports U.S.-Israel interests, AIPAC. I've signed many of those letters. When I look at a letter, Mr. Timmerman, I look at the content of the letter. I look at what it actually says. And what that letter says was that the United States should support a two-state solution, which is the position of the government of Israel, as well as the position of the United States government, at least since President Bush was the President of the United States. I actually think that that's a sensible solution. The letter is very clear, actually, that ultimately this is a decision that has to be arrived at through negotiation of the two parties. But this is just a clear example of misrepresenting the letter. I hope everybody, when they sign letters, they will actually look at the contents of a letter. That's exactly what I did.
1 minute, Mr. Timmerman.
Well, I would also look at the organization that is publishing the letter. In this case, it was a group that was calling for Israel to make unilateral negotiating concessions to a Palestinian partner they do not have. And they were summoned by Israel's deputy ambassador, the DCM, at the embassy not to do this. There is not a single Republican on this letter, by the way. It is a purely partisan letter. People who are hard left, members of Congress who oppose the state of Israel. In addition to this, you have repeatedly missed opportunities, I should say, to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Israel and to enforce U.S. law, which calls for us to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So this is part of a pattern of being a fair weather friend of Israel, Mr. Van Hollen, which I think would be very useful for you to explain to your supporters.
How much time do I have?
30 seconds. Sorry.
Just know this. Mr. Timmerman has repeatedly misrepresented my record. We had an exchange the other day where I laid out the facts. He could not respond to a single one in a larger setting. As to the sort of organization that sponsored it, it's kind of like his statement on a piece of literature that says, as Van Hollen is born in Pakistan, you must have some... That was another piece of information he had on this literature. Again, you're talking about somebody here who, by innuendo and misinformation, tries to make an attack. Mr. Timmerman, we should stick to the facts in these debates. I wish you would, because that would actually further the conversation. People like Matt Mathias, distinguished Republican senator from Maryland, would never misrepresent the facts the way you do.
Thank you. For our final round of the candidates questioning each other, Mr. Van Hollen, you will have 30 seconds to ask Mr. Timmerman a question.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, there's lots of secret money that is flowing into campaigns around the country these days. I introduced a very simple bill in the United States Congress. It's called the Disclose Act. It says that voters have a right to know who is spending millions of dollars to try and influence their vote. My question to you is, will you join the one other Republican in the House of Representatives, Walter Jones, and co-sponsor that legislation so that voters can at least know who is paying for all the ads that are being run out there?
No, I won't. And I will not co-sponsor that because that is a piece of legislation which aims at allowing the labor unions in this country to control the political process. It's a piece of legislation that puts the television networks and the left-wing media that used to be called the mainstream media. I used to work for some of those organizations, and I know what I'm talking about. When they used to puts them in control of the political process. If you want to have real campaign finance reform, I would like to see us lift all the limits on contributions and immediately publish the contributions on the internet. That would be real campaign finance reform. It would allow people to see immediately who's giving money where, if that is the real concern. I just don't think that that is your real concern, Chris. And in fact, you mentioned earlier that I could not answer a single one of the facts that you brought out. I was not given any time to answer those facts, which is why I brought it up tonight. So what I would like to say is that there is not a single fact that we put out in my campaign which you have refuted. You simply changed the subject and brought up different sets of facts rather than addressing the actual fact. I mentioned Jerusalem earlier. You have missed many, many opportunities to support moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. You just changed the subject. You didn't like that fact. I mentioned Iron Dome in one of these. Iron Domes is a missile defense system, which is very important for Israel, and you co-sponsored the Iron Dome Act, and then when it came time to fund it, you refused the funding twice. You voted against it twice. So let's stick to the facts. I'm very happy to do that, but that is your record that I was mentioning. There's not a single piece of legislation that I mentioned there, Mr. Van Hollen, that is not factual, that is not something that you either signed or failed to sign.
Well, I apologize to all of you who came in the middle of the debate we had the other day, but the reality is I'm a co-sponsor of the Iron Dome Act. I support funding for Iron Dome, period. I understand you didn't answer my question completely with respect to disclose, and you also missed. Well,
I did. I said no.
But let me say, I think the labor unions who did not support this bill would be surprised at your characterization, because the reality is there are lots of groups out there who may not prefer to have disclosure with respect to a lot of these secret ads, but my view is that this is an issue Republicans, Democrats, and Independents can unite about. It's in the people's interest to know who is bankrolling all those ads. And I fail to see why you don't support transparency, which brings greater accountability. You had 8 of the 9 justices of the Supreme Court, including Justice Scalia, saying that transparency and disclosure was actually important to the democratic process. Not only did 8 of the 9 say it was constitutional, they said it would be good for our democracy. I understand a lot of people want to hide who is funding these campaigns, but a little disclosure, a little sunlight would be very good for the process.
30 seconds.
We can actually agree on that. Sunlight and disclosure are good for the process, which is why I would support real campaign finance reform, which would immediately publish every contribution to every campaign immediately on the internet so everybody can go and view it. That is a real Disclose Act, Chris, and not something that would just favor certain groups over other groups.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That was the candidates portion of candidates questioning each other portion of forum debate. I will now close out this round by asking a question of my own. That question goes to you, Ms. Timmerman, for closing out. The Supreme Court's ruling on Citizens United opened the floodgates for so-called super PACs to spend unlimited amounts of money throughout this election season. Give us your view on super PACs and tell us, would you support Congress reinstating spending limits, or or is money simply another form of free speech?
Well, I think we've just discussed this for the past round, but I'm happy to go back into that. The Citizens United decision was something that I think is tremendously important because it shut down an effort by Congress to restrict free speech. I don't like to see restrictions on free speech. I don't like to see labor unions have restrictions on their free speech. I don't like to see corporations have restrictions on their free speech, or persons have restrictions on their free speech. In this election, you're going to hear an awful lot about an issue we have not yet discussed, which is Obamacare, where the federal government is trying to restrict the religious freedom of the Catholic Church. Now, I don't happen to be Catholic, but I think it's very important that our religious freedoms, our first freedom, along with free speech. I don't want to see the federal government putting restrictions on those things. The Citizens United decision was an important one. It opened up the floodgates for yet more money to come into the political process. I don't think that's the problem. I think it's the lack of transparency that is the problem. And I'm happy to see more money come into the political process. I would like to see it out there and disclosed, a real Disclose Act. A real Disclose Act, not a phony Disclose Act that simply aids one side over the other side.
Thank you. You have 1 minute.
Well, the Citizens United Act, I thought, was one of the worst Supreme Court decisions. The fundamental finding was that corporations are people too. We've had a long tradition in this country when it comes to our politics between between the voices of people and the voices of corporations. And what that did was unleash an incredible amount of corporate money into the political process, including a lot of secret money, which Mr. Timmerman still apparently doesn't want to support the Disclose Act, which is the one measure introduced in Congress that would actually require that people disclose the funding, whether it's from corporations or others, for these expenditures by these organizations that are running these ads with nice-sounding names, but not telling you who is financing those ads. So that would be good for the political process, and my view is that we should not treat corporations like people. They can't walk into the voting booth and vote, although maybe that's the next thing Mr. Timmerman would support. But I do think that the Citizens United was wrongly decided in my view, but at the very least, we should now end the secret money in politics. That's one thing we can still do consistent with that Supreme Court decision.
Thank you. Ms. Timmerman, I believe.
Is that 30 seconds?
30 seconds.
I got 30 seconds. In the 2008 campaign, I was working for Newsmax looking into campaign finance abuses. at that point by the Obama campaign. And we found that there was $225 million that came in from undisclosed donors. These were contributions under $200. That would not be affected at all by the Disclose Act, Chris. That is not real transparency. That just covers up things like credit card frauds, things like gift card fraud, things like Acorn handing out this money, walking around money that winds up in the coffers of presidential candidates. We saw this in 2008. It is happening again right now. What you're talking about is not true transparency, and you know it very well. It's a way of covering up secret contributions that are given out by the labor unions, given out by donors with big pockets who hand out those gift cards, and they wind up in large donations, large amounts, $225 million in 2008 in the Obama campaign.
So little time, so much misinformation, Mr. Timmerman. I just astounded.
I think that cuts us off. So, unless you have 3 or 4 words, Mr. Timmerman, to answer that.
Well, I'm not going to treat Mr. Van Hollen with the same respect that he treats me.
Well, let's close it off there before it starts getting a little rough up here. I'd like you to give them a round of applause for their questions. And now we're moving on to our closing statements. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Timmerman's team won the coin toss and chose to go last. So, Mr. Van Hollen, if you would please lead us off for the closing.
Well, thank you first very much for hosting us. Thank all of you for joining us this evening. And I said it's been a great privilege to represent the existing 8th Congressional District and ask for your support in this election as the districts change to include places like Frederick County and Carroll County. It's been a great treat to meet a lot of new people in this part of the state. I mentioned Matt Mathias for a reason. I had the privilege of working for him. As I said, he was a distinguished son of Frederick. He came from Frederick County. And he presented, in my view, a model of principled leadership. He was a leader on important issues. He had a set of values and priorities, but he was willing to reach across the aisle to get things done. And at the end of the day, it just turns out that his party left him. Because what happened was the Republican Party that Matt Mathias was a part of essentially became what is now the Tea Party. Now, I'm fine with everyone's entitled to their views, but the Tea Party is not a group that has been willing, at least in Congress, to reach across the aisle and make the compromises necessary. All of us have strongly held views. All of us have strong positions and principles on issues. If we're going to move forward as a country, we have to both find common ground on these issues, but there also has to be a willingness to compromise. I can't ask for 100% of what I want all the time, and our colleagues on the other side in negotiations can't ask for 100% of what they want, because if you do that, you never move the country forward. That's why I support the bipartisan framework of Simpson-Bowles. Not every recommendation, but they have an overall approach that was arrived at by Republicans and Democrats coming together. Mr. Timmerman doesn't like it. He opposes it. He's been on the record against it, just like he wouldn't answer the question about whether Matt Mathias was a model. I think he was. And he was a Republican in the moderate school who was willing to make compromises and do good for his state and his country. And I think he was a role model for me. And it's unfortunate that he's not a role model for many of the Republicans, people, men and women from his own party right now on Capitol Hill. Because if there were more Republicans like that, we would be able to move together, working toward common ground, working toward compromise, working for the common good. I thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you tonight, and again, I thank our hosts.
Thank you. Ms. Timmerman, you have 2 minutes for the final word.
Thank you. Thank you again to the Frederick News Post and to this wonderful educational institution and to all of you who have been here today. I want to thank my wife, Christina, and the fourth of our 5 children, Diana, who is here with her. I want to thank Bud Otis, and I want to thank Sharon Davidson, who have been giving of their time, and many of the rest of you who are here giving of your time. Without volunteers, we would not have a campaign. I look forward to representing you in Congress. In the new 8th District. I look forward to winning your support and winning your trust. And I look forward to that from having spent a lot of time on the ground with many of you getting to know you over the past 8 to 9 months. You have a clear choice in this election. You have a choice between a member of Congress who votes 96% of the time with his party and yet claims to be bipartisan, or somebody who has a record of working with Democrats and Republicans on real issues such as human rights, real issues such as tax freedom, real issues such as economic freedom. Our country is headed off a fiscal cliff, and we have to get it right. We do not have a spending problem, we have a revenue problem. We cannot raise taxes in the middle of a recession. We have to get the size of our government under control, we have to get our spending under control. They've had their chance. The Democrats have been in power in Congress since 2007. They've had their chance, they've failed. It's time for a change. I believe that we can get this economy going again. We can create millions of jobs. I've got a plan on my website at timmermanforcongress.com/jobs where we can create millions of jobs and enhance our national security by using cheap, safe, U.S.-produced methanol from natural gas as a substitute for imported oil. This will create millions of jobs. It can be done in an economically, in an ecologically responsible fashion, and it will get us off foreign oil and enhance our national security. I believe that we have to keep our taxes down instead of going off the fiscal cliff and raising them, as my opponent wants to do, by $650 billion next year alone. Finally, I believe we have to maintain our military strong, because weakness, such as this administration has shown, is a provocation. Weakness invites attack. The reason that our ambassador was killed in Libya was because this administration has weakened this country. I will make sure that our military has the best equipment, the best training, and the best care when they come back from war that money can provide. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, without ado, we are going to move on to District 6 forum/debate. So if I'd like to invite the candidates to come up to the stage. To your right, we have Congressman Roscoe Bartlett.